never been a real want to be in the spotlight kind of performer. I'm more of a singer-songwriter guy. And
Alan Jackson, the soft-spoken Georgia boy who became the voice of a generation, is once again at the center of headlines. But this time, the news isn't about a new record, a sold-out tour, or another Hall of Fame honor. It's something far more personal, something that has shaken both fans and fellow musicians. At 66 years old, Alan has lived a life that could fill 10 lifetimes, chart-topping hits, emotional tributes, and unforgettable performances. Yet behind the cowboy hat and the timeless songs lies a man facing challenges no one expected to see play out in public. The latest update about his health, career, and future has left the country music world stunned. Friends are speaking out, fans are crying out, and Nashville is holding its breath. What happened to the man who gave us Remember When, Where Were You, and Chattahoochee, and how will this headline change his legacy forever? Long before the bright lights of Nashville ever called his name, Alan Eugene Jackson was just a small-town boy from Newnan, Georgia. Born on October 17, 1958, he grew up in a modest home built around his grandfather's old tool shed. Life was simple, often tough, but those humble beginnings shaped the man who would go on to reshape country music itself. Alan didn't grow up with wealth or privilege. His family barely scraped by. But what they lacked in money, they made up for in faith, love, and an unshakable belief in hard work. As a boy, Alan was quiet, often retreating to his own world. He discovered music through the hymns at church and the records his parents treasured. Country legends like Hank Williams and Gene Watson poured through his speakers, filling his young heart with dreams bigger than his tiny town could hold. At just 12 years old, Alan picked up a guitar and began teaching himself how to play. By his teenage years, he was already writing songs, though he kept them mostly to himself, scribbling lyrics in notebooks no one else ever saw. After high school, Alan worked ordinary jobs: construction, car sales, even at a shoe repair store. He married his high school sweetheart, Denise, who believed in his talent more than he believed in himself. It was Denise who encouraged him to chase his passion. In fact, when she once met Glenn Campbell while working as a flight attendant, she boldly slipped him a tape of Alan's demos. That chance connection would later open doors Alan never dreamed possible. When Alan finally made his way to Nashville in the early 1980s, the odds were stacked against him. Nashville was brutal to outsiders. Record executives turned away hundreds of hopefuls daily. But Alan was different. He didn't chase the flashy trends of the era. He leaned into something older, purer. His voice carried the ache of Hank Williams, but with a freshness that felt new. He wrote from the heart, about ordinary people and everyday struggles. It was music that sounded like the lives his audience was living. His big break came in 1989, when he signed with Arista Records as their very first country artist. In 1990, his debut album, Here in the Real World, was released, and the title track became his first major hit. Suddenly, this Georgia boy, who once fixed shoes for a living, was standing on the charts alongside legends like George Strait and Randy Travis. His blend of traditional honky-tonk with heartfelt storytelling struck a chord with America. He wasn't just another country singer. He was a voice of authenticity, at a time when country music was beginning to blur into pop. Through the 1990s, Alan's star only rose higher. Albums like Don't Rock the Jukebox and A Lot About Livin' and A Little 'Bout Love produced hit after hit, each song weaving itself into the fabric of American life. Fans didn't just listen to Alan Jackson, they lived through him. His words captured their heartbreak, their joy, their faith, and their resilience. He was the everyman's poet, a superstar who still looked and acted like the neighbor down the road. By the end of the decade, Alan Jackson was no longer the small-town boy chasing a dream. He was one of the most important figures in modern country music. His rise was meteoric, but it wasn't fueled by gimmicks or controversy. It was fueled by something far rarer: honesty, humility, and an unshakable love for the genre that raised him. It was this remarkable rise, from a shed in Georgia to the stages of Nashville that made Alan's voice one of the most trusted in country music. And it's why the latest headlines about him hit so hard. Because when a man who stood so tall begins to stumble, the entire world feels it. Alan Jackson didn't just sing country music. He became the soundtrack to countless American lives. From the first notes of Chattahoochee, fans knew he wasn't simply performing songs, he was telling their own stories. Released in 1993, that playful anthem about young love, riverbanks, and summertime freedom became more than a hit. It was an anthem of youth, a celebration of simple pleasures that everyone could relate to. It was the kind of song that made you roll the windows down and sing along, no matter where you were. And yet, Alan was far more than lighthearted fun. With Remember When, released in 2003, he reached deeper into the soul of his audience. That tender ballad chronicled the journey of love, from young passion to old age, reminding listeners of their own milestones, heartbreaks, and promises. Couples danced to it at weddings, played it at anniversaries, and even clung to it during farewells. It wasn't just a song, it was life itself put to melody. Then came Where Were You? When the World Stopped Turning, Alan's powerful and emotional response to the tragedy of September 11th. 2001. Written with raw sincerity, the song avoided politics and anger, focusing instead on faith, grief, and humanity. When he performed it at the CMA Awards that same year, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Overnight, Alan Jackson wasn't just a singer. He was a voice of healing for a nation in pain. That moment secured his legacy as more than an entertainer. He was a storyteller who could bridge divides and bring people together through music. But Alan's magic didn't stop there. Tracks like Drive, for Daddy Gene, a heartfelt tribute to his father, resonated with every child who ever sat behind the wheel with a parent. Don't Rock the Jukebox and Gone Country reminded fans of his honky-tonk roots, playful but grounded in tradition. Each album brought a mix of humor, nostalgia, and wisdom that ensured his music stayed relevant across generations. Fans who grew up with him in the 90s passed his songs down to their children, making him a bridge between old and new. And unlike many artists, Alan never lost sight of where he came from. He didn't chase pop country trends or bend to Nashville's pressures. Instead, he doubled down on steel guitars, fiddles, and lyrics that spoke to faith, family, and love. This dedication to traditional country music made him a champion for the genre's survival in an era when it was threatened by commercialization. With more than 35 #1 hits and over 75 million records sold worldwide, Alan Jackson's music didn't just climb the charts, it settled into hearts. His songs played at graduations, funerals, backyard barbecues, and national ceremonies. They became markers of time, etching themselves into memories people would carry forever. That's why the latest headlines about him cut so deeply. When someone whose music defined life's most sacred moments faces an uncertain future, it feels personal. Fans aren't just worried about the man, they're worried about losing the voice that told their stories, carried their grief, and celebrated their joys. Alan Jackson wasn't just making music, he was shaping the very soundtrack of America. Behind the cowboy hat, platinum records, and thunderous applause stood a man whose life was always rooted in three pillars: family, faith, and the foundations of his Southern upbringing. Alan Jackson never let the fame of Nashville sweep him too far from the dirt roads of Georgia, or the values instilled in him as a boy. His love story with Denise, his high school sweetheart, became one of the most enduring relationships in country music. They married young, long before Alan had any promise of success, when dreams were still fragile and life was uncertain. Denise believed in him when no one else did, pushing him to chase Nashville even when he doubted himself. Their marriage, however, wasn't without storms. In the late 1990s, cracks appeared, and they briefly separated, a devastating moment for Alan, who had built his career on the image of a devoted family man. But instead of ending, that chapter became a powerful testament to forgiveness and renewal. Denise stood by him again, their bond stronger for surviving the fire. And Alan himself admitted he had to learn humility and accountability. That lesson seeped into his music, giving his later ballads a depth that only comes from walking through brokenness and finding healing on the other side. Together, Alan and Denise raised 3 daughters, Maddie, Allie, and Danny, away from the spotlight whenever possible. He wanted them to live normal lives, not be consumed by the machine of celebrity. He often spoke about how his proudest title wasn't Entertainer of the Year, but Dad, and how watching his daughters grow into women was the greatest honor of his life. Family became his anchor, and whenever the whirlwind of fame threatened to consume him, he returned home to the laughter, love, and grounding of his wife and children. Beyond family, faith was Alan's steady compass. He wasn't the type to preach from a stage, but his beliefs were always woven into his work. Songs like I Love to Tell the Story and Precious Memories reflected his deep connection to gospel music and the church hymns of his youth. When the world felt dark or uncertain, Alan leaned on his faith, just as he did when writing Where Were You? When the world stopped turning. To him, faith was not performance, it was survival, a quiet strength that carried him through illness, fame, and the painful realities of life. And through it all, he remained deeply tied to his Southern roots. Whether in his music, his interviews, or his private life, Alan never lost the humility of the boy who grew up in a tiny house in Georgia. He preferred fishing to red carpets, family dinners to Hollywood galas, and small-town simplicity to lavish excess. Even as his bank account grew and his name lit up marquees, Alan Jackson stayed the same man his neighbors knew, honest, humble, and deeply connected to the foundations that built him. This devotion to family, faith, and foundation is why fans see him not only as a superstar, but as someone they can trust. A man who lived out the same struggles, joys, and values they held dear. And now, as the latest headlines reveal challenges threatening his health and future, it is these very foundations, his wife, his daughters, his faith, that stand beside him once again. For all the glitz of award shows, the thunder of sold-out arenas, and the millions of albums sold, Alan Jackson's story has never been free from struggle. In fact, behind the curtain of fame, his journey has been marked by battles that most fans never fully saw. Perhaps the most personal of these was the quiet war he waged with his own health. In 2021, Alan publicly revealed that he had been living with Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, a degenerative nerve condition that slowly robs the body of balance, mobility, and strength. It wasn't a diagnosis he could simply push aside with grit and determination, and it wasn't something he could sing his way out of. For years, Alan had hidden the signs, occasional stumbles on stage, difficulty standing for long performances, fatigue that weighed heavier than the applause could lift. But eventually, it became impossible to hide. Standing before cameras, Alan admitted with quiet honesty that this disease would progress, that it had no cure, and that it was changing his life forever. The revelation stunned fans who had always seen him as an unshakable figure, tall and commanding with his guitar in hand. To hear that the same legs that carried him across countless stages were betraying him was a crushing blow. But health wasn't the only struggle Alan faced. He had endured the punishing demands of the music industry itself. Nashville was not always kind to traditionalists, and Alan fought battles to keep steel guitars and fiddles alive, in a genre that seemed more eager each year to trade its roots for pop hooks and crossover appeal. He became a defender of tradition, often at odds with executives who wanted him to modernize his sound. His refusal to compromise cost him opportunities, but earned him respect among purists and fans who longed for authenticity. Then there were the personal struggles, the strain fame placed on his marriage, the mistakes he admitted to, and the guilt that nearly cost him his family. He and Denise weathered separations, reconciliations, and the harsh glare of public opinion. Alan never pretended to be perfect. In fact, he admitted in interviews and songs that he had stumbled, that he had hurt those he loved, and that he had to rebuild trust from the ground up. These confessions weren't weaknesses, they were proof of his humanity. proof that even country giants fall to their knees. Financially, too, there were pressures. Despite his immense success, Alan avoided the reckless spending and indulgences of many in his field. Yet the stress of managing a career of that magnitude, supporting a team, and constantly producing hit after hit wore heavy on him. There was always another tour, another expectation, another demand. And though he rarely showed it on stage, the weight took its toll. Through all of this, Alan carried himself with the quiet resilience of a man who understood suffering as part of life's song. His health struggles, his battles with the industry, and his personal missteps created scars that were both painful and instructive. They shaped his later music, deepened his lyrics, and gave him an authenticity no PR campaign could ever buy. And now, with the latest headlines echoing around the world, fans are seeing once again that the cowboy they idolized is still human, still vulnerable, still walking through storms just like them. The difference is that he does it with the same honesty he's always given his audience. Honesty that turns even his darkest struggles into songs of survival. The moment Alan Jackson stepped forward with his most recent revelation, the world of country music seemed to freeze. Fans who had followed him for decades, who had sung his words at weddings, funerals, and every milestone in between, now found themselves bracing for news they never wanted to hear. After years of keeping his health struggles private, Alan confirmed that the toll of Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease had grown heavier, and that it was now forcing him to make heartbreaking choices about his future in music. In interviews and on stage, his voice carried the weight of a man still deeply in love with performing but trapped in a body that was betraying him. He admitted that touring was becoming increasingly difficult, that even walking across a stage without stumbling was a challenge, and that the disease was progressing more quickly than he had hoped. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't hide behind vague statements. He told the truth, as he always had, and in doing so, he broke millions of hearts. The announcement shook Nashville. It wasn't simply that another artist was stepping back. It was that a legend, a man who had defined the very soul of the genre, was acknowledging that the curtain might be closing on his time in the spotlight. Alan revealed that his upcoming performances could very well be his last, and that he wanted to spend whatever strength he had left making memories with his family and ensuring his music would live on long after he could no longer stand beneath the lights. He spoke candidly about how much he would miss the roar of the crowd, the feel of a guitar against his chest, the connection of looking out at thousands of faces singing his words back to him. But he also made it clear that this was not the end of Alan Jackson's story. He planned to continue writing and recording as long as he physically could, leaving behind a treasure of songs for future generations. He wanted to give everything he had left to the music that had given him everything. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Social media erupted with tributes. Fans flooded his accounts with memories of how his songs carried them through joy and heartbreak alike, and country radio stations dedicated hours to playing his greatest hits in honor of the man who had given them so much. News outlets ran headlines that read like farewells, but Alan himself resisted that word. He wasn't saying goodbye. He was simply admitting the truth about the road ahead. In true Alan fashion, even his revelation wasn't drenched in pity. Instead, it was filled with grace, humility, and gratitude. He thanked his fans for walking with him through every stage of his life. He expressed deep love for his wife and daughters, and he promised to keep giving what he could for as long as he could. Yet no matter how softly he delivered the words, the impact was seismic. To hear Alan Jackson admit that his time on stage might be drawing to a close was like watching a star fade from the sky. It reminded everyone that even legends are human. Even icons are mortal, and even the strongest voices can tremble when faced with time. When the news of Alan Jackson's revelation swept through Nashville, the response from the industry was nothing short of monumental. Fellow artists, from country music's brightest newcomers to its most established legends, paused their own spotlights to shine one on Alan. George Strait, one of Alan's closest peers and longtime friends, called him the heart of real country music, and admitted that the thought of Alan stepping away left a hole that could never be filled. Dolly Parton, with her trademark grace, reminded the world that Alan's music was more than entertainment. It was healing, storytelling, and a gift that will endure long after the stage lights dim. Younger stars like Luke Bryan, Casey Musgraves, and Chris Stapleton spoke openly about how Alan's songs influenced their careers, proving that his reach spanned generations and styles. The Grand Ole Opry, an institution Alan had cherished throughout his career, held a night of tribute where members sang his classics in honor of the man who carried tradition like a badge of honor. Across the industry, one thing became clear: Alan Jackson was not simply another star, he was a pillar. Without him, country music would feel incomplete. Awards organizations echoed this sentiment. The Country Music Association released a statement calling him an architect of modern country who stayed faithful to its roots, while the Academy of Country Music honored his courage in facing his struggles with honesty. Radio stations across the nation played marathon blocks of his hits, fans calling in to share the moments those songs had touched their lives. Nashville itself seemed to breathe differently. Murals of Alan's face were painted downtown, his name flashed across the signs of honky-tonks, and bars filled with voices singing Chattahoochee late into the night. Industry insiders admitted privately that Alan's absence from touring would not just leave a void on stage, but financially as well. His concerts were consistently top-selling, and his presence drew thousands. Yet the focus was not on loss, but on gratitude. Gratitude for the decades of honesty he had given, for defending traditional country when few others dared, for proving that success didn't have to mean compromise. And perhaps most powerful of all were the stories told by his peers. Reba McEntire recalled nights spent side stage watching Alan perform with tears in her eyes. Vince Gill remembered Alan's humility, how he'd show up to a rehearsal in jeans and boots, blending in with the crew instead of demanding special treatment. Younger artists remembered words of encouragement from him backstage, his quiet wisdom that always carried more weight than showy speeches. The industry didn't just react with tributes, it reacted with love, the kind reserved only for those who've left an indelible mark. To see Nashville rally around Alan was to see the measure of his impact. His revelation may have signaled the slowing of his career, but in the hearts of those who shared the stage with him, his influence was eternal. The country music industry was not mourning the end of Alan Jackson. It was celebrating a legacy still being written, a legacy built on authenticity, faith, and music that will echo long after he's gone. While the industry's tributes poured in, it was the voices of ordinary fans that revealed the true depth of Alan Jackson's impact. From small towns in Georgia to bustling cities across the world, people who had grown up with his music shared stories of how his songs weren't just melodies, but milestones in their lives. Couples wrote about how they danced to Remember When at their weddings, how those lyrics carried them through decades of love, reminding them of youth, parenthood, and growing old together. Families recalled long road trips with Chattahoochee blasting from the radio, kids singing in the back seat, while parents smiled at the innocence of it all. Veterans spoke of "Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning" as a lifeline after 9/11, a song that helped them process pain when words failed. Fathers shared how Drive, for Daddy Gene, mirrored their own childhoods, sitting behind the wheel with their dads, passing down not just a skill, but a legacy of connection. Fans flooded social media with personal videos, tearfully singing along to their favorite Alan Jackson songs, often with guitars in hand and children at their side. Some showed tattoos of his lyrics, etched into their skin, permanent reminders of the music that guided them through heartbreak, or gave them hope when life seemed unbearable. Others shared grainy photos of concerts decades old, clutching ticket stubs like sacred relics, recalling the nights when Alan's voice filled an arena, and, for a few hours, made life feel timeless. For many, Alan wasn't just an artist. He was family. His music played at funerals where goodbyes were too painful to say, at graduations where futures felt uncertain, at hospital bedsides where faith was tested, and at backyards where life's simplest joys unfolded. In each of these moments, Alan Jackson was there, his voice a thread weaving through the joys and sorrows of everyday people. His honesty made listeners feel seen. His humility made them feel like he understood them personally, and his consistency made him reliable in a world that often wasn't. When the headlines about his struggles surfaced, the collective fan response was not just sadness, it was heartbreak, as if someone from their own family had been struck with hardship. Thousands posted prayers, messages of encouragement, and promises to keep his music alive no matter what. Some even shared how Alan's courage in facing illness gave them strength to fight their own battles, turning his revelation into yet another way he touched lives. Tribute concerts organized by fans sprang up in towns across America, people gathering in bars, community centers, and living rooms to sing his songs together, creating an echo of his voice even when he couldn't be there in person. The emotional connection was clear. Alan Jackson's music had transcended entertainment. It had become a companion, a teacher, a healer, and in many ways, a reflection of the people who listened to it. Fans weren't just mourning the slowing of a career, they were cherishing the bond with a man whose words helped them survive, celebrate, and believe. And now, faced with the reality that his voice on stage may soon fall silent, that bond has only grown stronger, uniting millions in gratitude for the gift he gave them, and in hope that his legacy will continue to sing long after he no longer can. Alan Jackson's revelation has left the world of country music in deep reflection, not just about the man himself, but about the legacy he has carved over decades. Few artists have managed to walk the delicate line between superstardom and authenticity the way Alan has. He never needed pyrotechnics or spectacle. All he needed was a guitar, a story, and the truth. That simplicity became his power, and it's what will keep his name alive long after the spotlight fades, carried in the hearts of millions who will never forget the man who sang their lives back to them.